I'm Mike Andrews of Yastis Cybersecurity Consulting, here once again with Karina Klever of Klever Compliance. And we're so happy to welcome guest Sabrina Palme, who's the founder and co-founder and CEO of Palme. Hey, Karina. Hey, Sabrina. How you doing?
Really good. How about yourself, Mike?
Fantastic.
Doing pretty well after all that troubleshooting. I need a drink at this point, even though it's like 10 a.m. or here. But nevertheless, super excited to be here. We had over 850 RSVPs, which is pretty crazy for a LinkedIn event. We're also happy to announce that just last night, we put all the prior webinars on a YouTube channel. So if you're interested in subscribing or checking them out, the link is in the comments of the post for this webinar. And we have all kinds of content ideas that'll be coming up. So we hope you join us and help it get off to a good start. So without further ado, let me pass it off to Karina for a brief introduction. Then we'll learn some more about Sabrina.
Sounds great. Thank you for the intros, and happy to once again continue the torch here. We do this monthly, and very excited that folks are really taking to joining us and attending. So we're incredibly honored to have Sabrina joining us this month. Just a trendsetter in the industry, especially in the AI governance space. So Sabrina, tell us a bit about your experience and the driving force behind Palqee. Very excited about your product, including Prisma, and some of the experiences you've had, especially in Q2 in New York. Can you tell us all about the history and where you've been and where you're going?
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me today. Very excited about our session. So really at Palqee, what we do, we bridge the gap between governance requirements and implementation with technical solutions that drive business efficiencies and value. And our product Prisma delivers that specifically for the implementation of trustworthy and responsible AI. It provides high precision instrumentation for AI in regulated industries like critical infrastructure and financial services. So really what it does, it gives you full visibility on the performance of your AI across your chosen metrics, such as hallucination, context relevance, and policy adherence, and explains how small changes in the input are impacting the performance of the AI in different contexts and scenarios. And really what differentiates in the market of other evaluation solutions is the approach that Prisma is taking. Because rather than taking a one-size-fits-all approach to evaluate hallucination, which really doesn't work on generative AI because it's very subjective in different scenarios, Prisma learns about your company controls and evaluation criteria and applies them to evaluate hallucination based on those criteria or any other metric. And that way you get that high precision, that explainability, because it's based on your definition and what you define as hallucinated or factual for your specific use case. And so we're really excited. The last 15 months have been quite the ride. We've been working with companies such as KPMG. The last 3 months, we were part of the FinTech Innovation Lab, which is funded by the New York City Partnership Fund in collaboration with Accenture, where we've worked with over 40 financial institutions to assess their AI implementation use cases, but also how we can support them with implementing Prisma to monitor the performance of their systems in various scenarios. And it has been hugely successful. We are now working with a variety of financial institutions in the US, and I'm very, very excited about the journey that we are on.
Wow, that's awesome. You've had worldwide growth already, and it's nice to see that major institutions are adapted to this, and after that, I'm sure that smaller institutions will take part at some point. So we have a wide range of topics to cover, and Sabrina and Karina will share all kinds of information. So the first question is for Sabrina. So with these companies that you're working with, what are some of the common pitfalls you see as they work to use AI more?
Of course. So considering you're talking about turning risks into readiness, I think one of the things that I see quite a lot is that there is quite a bit of confusion and uncertainty when it specifically comes to AI deployment. And depending on the stat you're referring to, it says right now that about 80 to 95% of all AI projects actually never see the light of day and never get out of POC stage. And it's an incredibly high number. And I think there are a couple of reasons for it. But the main reason really is that quite often in testing phase, you're iterating testing, but once you want to put the system out there, it's unclear what is the actual return on investment of the system going to be. And then tightly linked to that, are the associated risks with deploying the AI acceptable to justify the potential return on investment, even if you actually don't know what it is? And that puts businesses into a very difficult scenario. Quite often we actually understand the risks when it comes to AI, but there's much uncertainty about how to manage it, who's responsible, who is accountable. Now, what I'm seeing is that a lot of businesses are setting up AI governance functions in an AI committee, which is great. But I think here, more often, we're finding ourselves in a scenario where if there is a lack of guidance and direction from top management on what is the overall business strategy when it comes to AI implementation, there's only so much the AI governance function can do. And if you're working in GRC, you will know this challenge just way too well. If there's lack of leadership support, the GRC function can only do so much. And it's the same when it comes to AI implementation. So you can't just offload that. You really need to have that strategy to be able to find what are our acceptable criteria when it comes to these risks, and to justify whether the expected return on investment is okay for a certain AI use case. Now, specifically to monitoring or what we are experiencing for our type of solution, another challenge we are seeing is testing AI systems is very different to deploying and monitoring them, because then they're out there in the wild. Then you really have the risks when it comes to personal data, discrimination, and all of these challenges. And quite often businesses, I think, underestimate the expertise that you need and the resources to monitor systems once they are in production.
There's so many disconnects there, right? Because when you're looking to leadership to say, give me that strategy, leadership is usually in a position where they're like, just go make it work. Right. And they don't really necessarily know what to say and what direction to give. They want to, but they're kind of looking to the professionals that are actually executing the technology to come up with the recommendations, to come up with the solutions. They'll give you the money, but they don't necessarily know what exactly. What do you mean a decision? And I always use this analogy, right? And you guys are way too young for this, but I remember when the internet first came out, right? And when the internet first came out, it was incredibly authoritative. It was incredibly, it was a screen that had all the answers, and it looked a lot more official than the encyclopedia sitting on the shelf that maybe you had, maybe you didn't, and you didn't want to lug over to the library to maybe figure out whether or not the answer you were being told was legitimate or not, right? Maybe you were just a little lazy and you wanted to watch the show on TV, right? Because we didn't have playback at the time. And, if you missed it on Tuesday at 7:00, you missed it till next week, and then you were behind. So you had to stay and watch it. So, I mean, the psychology behind that information that was always readily available really gave us this very authoritative sort of presence when the internet came out. Before long, we realized that everything on the internet was not true like we thought it was. And now what we're seeing with the AI is basically it's everything on the internet multiplied by 1,000,000. And there's no data scrubbing, and there's no way to validate that the data that we're using is. So I'm always going to come back to the basics. I'm always going to say data classification, know where your data is, treat AI like a vendor, right? Make sure that you understand where that AI vendor is putting your data. Know what data is going into that AI vendor, right? When we talk about QMS, ISO 9001, which is very closely correlated to ISO 42001. And Sabrina, you were a little modest. You kind of missed the piece where you're sitting on the seat in BSI, right? And I'd love for you to talk about that, where there's that critical part of correlating the standards that the globe is using for AI to correlate to what we know is 9001, where You have an input, you have a process, and you have a defined output. You know the data that's coming in. I always use this pharmaceutical example. I know my recipe. I know the stuff I'm putting in the cauldron. I know the recipe I know the temperature that the cauldron is at. I know how many times I turn the cauldron. I know, what consistency the contents need to be. I know that at the end I have some pressed pills that are serialized. I want them to be serialized because if somebody gets sick, I want to be able to trace back to that cauldron, right? So the same thing with AI. I want the actual data input. I want to know how I'm processing that data and what my purpose is. I want to know what the intended output is. So we have to be as diligent with successful AI solutions. If you don't have your workflow well defined, it's just not going to work. If it's not repeatable, if your document says I'm going to occasionally do something like a control, what's an occasionally? Once a week? 5 minutes? Once a month? Quarterly? What does occasionally mean? That has to be very specifically defined.
A lot of great information there. I mean, that stat from Sabrina about the amount of projects, the percent of projects that don't leave the proof of concept phase, that's pretty alarming because in IT, the rate's kind of high, but not anywhere that high. So it shows that there's an even larger disconnect between leadership and the teams planning out these project concepts. So in traditional cyber GRC, the compliance aspect gets a lot of attention, which is other parties kind of making sure that you're doing it, asking questions. Yet this webinar is about AI governance, not compliance. So that means we have to handle it in-house. So Karina, this question's for you, and it's a hard one. If you're talking to business leaders that might be on this call, do you have any opinions on how AI governance can help them move forward with AI?
So governance, risk, and compliance, right? You have some of the basic, simple, repeatable controls that you have for any of your other operations, right? You have competency areas, you have patch management, you have change management, you have incident management, you have data management, you have vendor management, you have AI management. You have a competency area that has a very well-defined process, a policy. Please look inside your company. If you do not have a policy for your company, write one. Call somebody, call 1-800-HELP-ME, write an AI policy. Give your folks instructions on what they should and should not be putting into AI, that they're using at home, that they're using at work, because there's just too many, and I'm not even going to go into all of the examples where there's very proprietary information that ends up in some data storage, who knows where, many spots removed, that is incredibly incriminating, of very confidential information that landed inside an A tool, names and diagnoses and health things, and it's just very bad. Make sure you provide your people guidance on what they should and should not be putting in there, right? So you want to manage, just like security awareness, right? You're doing, and hopefully you're not only doing it once a year, but just like you're being aware of that phishing campaign, or that nefarious email or social engineering. Make sure that from an end user perspective, you're providing that guidance, and from an internal perspective on how well that competency area is working, you've established controls that you're measuring on a very defined basis that is telling you, do I or do I not, am I succeeding or am I not succeeding with satisfying these controls? Now, what I've seen, Sabrina, of course, absolute brilliant mind who's traveled the world, right? The function of picking up that hand and saying, hey, wait a minute, I'm an AI platform. I'm unsure about this answer. Dear human, come and help me decide whether or not this answer is correct or not. that's an absolutely critical piece that's missing, because it becomes a subjective push-pull. Well, my AI tool's better than your AI tool, neener. So who do you believe? Whereas what's been integrated in this workflow that Sabrina's talking about is truly a tiebreaker, right? It's a, hey, I want to make sure that I'm providing the right answer. Because when you talk about finances, when you talk about healthcare, when you talk about very critical elements in our everyday lives, you don't want that variability of an error.
Yeah, I think perhaps to add to this, in terms of tips and defining these controls specifically for AI, I think ISO 42001 earlier was mentioned. I think the beauty or the great part about ISO 42001, it's very closely aligned to ISO 27001, if you're familiar with that in terms of approach, so you do not need to reinvent the wheel. And it comes with a catalog of controls that you can use and appropriate to your reality and your environment. I think in the US, of course, there's also the NIST AI risk management framework, which I think also provides great controls. And then yes, to your point, Karina, one of the controls is monitoring the performance of your AI, where you will need to have tools in place that allow you to do that confidently. And then also, of course, specific to your other policies and controls and criteria. Absolutely.
That's great information, and there's new examples like every day of why companies need to be thinking about this stuff. If anyone saw what happened over at X.com with Grok, it got really drunk the other day, and it started saying all sorts of stuff. When people were asking it questions, it was calling itself some really evil historic people. I'm not even gonna give it any more attention than that, but AI governance would be the good way to solve that. How is X handling AI governance? Not really sure. But if they're not already handling it in a good way, I'm sure this will probably be a wake-up call in that regard. So with AI governance, you don't want just one party, like the GRC team, to be the only one involved. Kind of like just like regular GRC. You need leadership in charge. So Sabrina, can you tell us about the 3 lines of defense within AI governance?
Yes, of course. I mean, for many who are joining today, they will be familiar with the concept of 3 lines of defense. And so we're really not reinventing the wheel here, but I think we are using what we know already works well and apply that for AI governance. And so just to, explain what I've seen, especially in financial institutions working quite well, where they were already a little bit more advanced in the implementation, is the first line would be your product owners and model risk owners, right? So these are the individuals or the teams where they're directly involved in developing, deploying, and using AI systems. And they're the ones also who own and manage the risks associated with the AI systems, because they're the ones, they say, I have a use case. I know I have an opportunity here. We can increase efficiencies. We can expand our market share, whatever the case may be. And so they have that ownership, and then establish and implement controls in line with company policies to manage these risks within the operational processes. Now, following that, you have your risk management and compliance function, which normally also would be if you have the AI committee or AI governance team or function. And so here, of course, they're the ones who oversee and challenge the first line's risk management activities. They're the ones who develop the risk management framework, the policies and procedures, and monitor the adherence of the guidelines, and also approve new AI use cases. So that way you ensure you give power to the different teams to test AI and implement AI, but you then have the second line of defense who review and approve against these company policies. And then the third line of defense is your internal audit. And again, if you're working in IT, something you're already super familiar with, for instance, and any other GRC function as well. So here you have your internal audits, making sure that your risk management framework and controls are effective, assess whether they need to be updated, and you conduct these audits to identify areas for improvement. Just to give one specific example, with one financial institution we've been working with, I don't remember if it was 15 or 16, but they've called it risk dimensions that they've had and the second line of defense implemented. And so essentially, whenever there was a product owner who said, oh, I have a great idea, a great use case for AI, they would need to assess that use case against these 16 dimensions, and then also explain what metrics they use to measure it, why these metrics are relevant, and how they update them and maintain the performance of the system over time. Then on top of that, these numbers need to be reported on a quarterly basis to the second line of defense. So I think, that is just to give an example of, how we can implement a framework that would allow you to empower your teams to implement AI while having that governance layer as well.
No, that's a great approach. So can you say that again? The 16, what was it called? And if you could tell us, did they create that in-house, or is that like an industry-wide thing?
No, so they created that in-house, but they used, of course, you always need to look at regulatory requirements, and especially financial services, they, have plenty of those. And then, of course, existing standards that can help, again, the ISO 42001s out there and your NIST risk management framework to see which controls apply, but then, apply it to their reality and what makes sense for them. So in other organizations, maybe you say, hey, we start with 6, right? Because these are the most important ones, and it's a little bit more simpler because we're a smaller organization. So it really depends on what your priorities are.
That's good. Good they took the initiative to define a methodology for themselves. So Karina, with AI governance, does it or should it be managed separately from your existing GRC program? Or if not, how would you kind of make the two work together?
So we are actually working on a white paper where we're kind of talking about leveraging some of the AI functionality in comparison to bringing in a new person on the team. And so just like we have, many of us have brought in somebody who, let's say, is a people pleaser. They come in and they say, yes, absolutely, to everybody. Even somebody that's sitting at the middle of a conference table with one side of the table saying no and the other side of the table saying yes, and they're sitting in the middle, and depending on what side they're looking at the table, they just agree with everyone, right? And so many times this is what AI is, and you gotta look out for that person, because you can't always gauge exactly where they sit, but they're going to just be agreeable, right? And so one of the other people is the overconfident person, right? They're going to come at you with conviction, and they're going to make sure that they're going to convince you that what they're telling you is right. Then you're going to have the gossiper, right? You're going to have that one person that's just going to spread. They're just going to spread that gossip all over. And you've got to look out for that person too, because if they start gossiping in the wrong direction, then everybody's going to believe it pretty soon, right? You're going to have the tunnel vision expert, right? You're going to have the manipulator on the team. You're going to have I forgot. Oh man, I'm sorry. That was due Thursday. Oh, I forgot. Shucks, sorry. Or I've got too much going on, so you can't rely on me. So all of these kinds of scenarios, right? And I can keep going with the types of people that we deal with as in humans on our teams that we have to, as humans, learn to work around. We're taking some of those personalities and we're basically writing a white paper about some of the characteristics that we've seen when we introduce AI into our environments and into our teams, so that we can actually look at our AI contributions and say, from a governance perspective, how would we measure and align with this type of contributor in our governance team? How would we check to make sure that that person who is the gossiper or the overconfident, yes, sir, person, right? That person, how do we integrate them and put in true metrics that can actually gauge their true success with the overall governance of the entire team or department or company, right? Now, in order to be able to do that correctly, you have to have a baseline in place from the company perspective that says, I know what my goals are, so that I can gauge whether or not you're actually matching those goals. But it kind of takes kind of two parts, right? So if you fail to control, I can only then gauge my risk and determine whether or not that failed control is significant enough. However, if I'm using checkbox compliance and those ethereally written vague controls that have nothing to do with my operations fail, how do I really gauge whether or not that's important to me? And many people are kind of stuck in that. When we've now added AI on top of that, that makes it even more confusing, because not only are we dealing with core GRC principles being undermined from a perspective of, oh, I've got 12,000 controls I have to get through, and I don't even know what really even applies to me. And the consultant's telling me they're going to be here 3 to 5 years and it's going to run me 10 to 15 million. And you want me to do AI? What? It actually complicates the scenarios that we have to deal with when we're asked to make decisions, because we don't know why we do half the things we do. Meanwhile, our IT guys are dealing with, 14 different platforms that are giving us false alarms, and we're not really able to actually focus on the true things that matter as far as our threats go. And our end users have to call in 5 different help desks based on the situation they have, right? So I mean, it's just a matter of prioritizing and really lowering that tool load, and we're increasing our tool load when we are introducing yet more tools into our environment that really are not contributing to our efficiency or productivity.
Oh, those are some great points. Sabrina, Karina had a lot of good insight there, but do you have any stories of how you've seen a bigger company like the ones you work with handle this? Just from memory?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes sort of back to the last question as well, and sort of the 3 lines of defense. I think generally in terms of best practice, it's certainly to not manage AI governance separate to your existing GRC program. I would also say that a lot of the expertise that you have and know-how of individuals that are part of your GRC program are also necessary for your AI governance program. Let's not forget, in this case with AI, what we are assessing is the technology, right? But like when it comes to Karina's point, when it comes to from a security and cyber risk and from a regulatory risk perspective, you are still looking at data protection challenges, IP challenges, generally data handling challenges, cyber threats in general. It's just that AI adds another dimension. So I think, as the IT professional, cyber professional, risk professional, compliance professional, they are the ones who certainly make sense to have on the team, on your governance board, to assess, okay, how are we going to go about this with AI? Now, the additional variable you have here is that you, of course, would want to have someone who has expertise about AI and can specifically share what are the challenges that are unique to AI. And then the other dimension is also possibly, depending on the AI use case, someone who has experience with anti-discrimination, fundamental rights, and ethics. I think these 2 are the new additions that you need to have in your governance function to have sort of like a good combination of skill set and expertise.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, even before the heavy use of AI, ethics is always a concern, but probably not so much within a GRC office like it is now. Because if businesses and individuals are using AI to help them make decisions, it can have a lot of second, third, fourth order effects if we don't take that sort of thing into account and be cognizant of the areas it's working well and the areas it's not working well. So Sabrina, when companies are looking to use AI more, how should they be thinking about buy versus build with AI?
Great question. And I think it goes back to overall, what's our strategy, our AI implementation strategy? I think one big factor for sure, naturally, is usually already the size of an organization and the nature of the organization, right? Normally, smaller businesses are more likely to buy versus build, unless they're an AI-first company or startup like ourselves, right? But the bigger the organization, I think here in terms of buy versus build, and again, financial sector, what we are seeing there is that build is usually driven by developing solutions internally that give you a competitive edge to gain more market traction, increase your market share, increase efficiencies, right? So this is where internal teams will be focusing on. And then buy is more focused on solutions that are not part of your core competencies, but are absolutely necessary for your operations and for your business. And so specifically cyber governance solutions are actually pretty big in terms of providing technical solutions for AI implementation. There is quite a big demand for that. And also because third-party tools is sort of having a separate third party providing you that layer of security. But then there are also on the infrastructure level, a lot of solutions for businesses buy. So for example, foundation models, LLMs, for financial institutions, let's just say any business, like including medium businesses, smaller businesses, is an absolute not a possibility to build your own LLM because it's just crazy expensive. And so of course then here you buy these solutions to help you with your AI implementation strategy. Now, one thing I should say is that, and we've seen this a couple of times, is that just because you can build, if you have the resources internally, doesn't mean you should. And it goes back to what are your core competencies? What kind of expertise do you already have internally that you can utilize? And it goes also back to what I've mentioned earlier, that it's a very different skill set to testing AI and deploying it. And I think the last 2 years, including leadership, and we need to cut them some slack as well. I mean, AI is moving at a rapid pace. It's really difficult to make a decision where you're placing your bet and where you're investing your money. And so it's been a lot of testing and iterating. And I think, now in the market, we're really seeing a shift where businesses and organizations are more willingly to deploy these systems. But that's a different ball game. Monitoring the system once it's out there, and specifically if there are concerns about ethics and the performance, and the decision can have an impact on an individual's life, possibly. You need to take different things into consideration and assess whether you have that expertise and skill set in-house. Another thing that we see as well, and this is perhaps more relevant for smaller organizations where you don't have an in-house team, the resources to develop your own systems, is that there is a struggle about existing vendors that you've been working with for years who suddenly have AI-powered tools as part of the offering. And so some financial institutions, they literally just say, like, Sabrina, we're just turning everything off because we don't know how to assess the risk. We don't know what that means with our data. We don't have a clear policy for this yet. So just like off everywhere. But possibly they're losing out on a big opportunity here because it definitely could help them increase efficiencies, right? So again, depending on your size, your strategy, assess where do you sit. If it's a buy strategy, figure out your vendor risk management ASAP. That's a priority. If you're developing internally, maybe you need to assess other things first from a governance perspective.
Yeah. Wow. There was so much there. When I saw you previously mention giving that example about the build versus buy, how you build if you want a competitive advantage and you buy if you want to be more efficient. That was a great way to look at it. I wrote that down, and I'm sure I'll steal it from you at some point and use it 2 or 3 times. But this has real world implications that you'll see every day on LinkedIn. Like I think it was yesterday, I saw this guy. I don't even remember who it was, but he posted that he had an AI startup that was basically built on top of an LLM, and it offered some cool functionality. He was seeing good growth, but now it's just not going as well because people are just going around and going directly to the LLM to ask that, and he's shutting it down. And this is build versus buy. This is having real world implications that you have to think about.
Actually, just a thought on this. One of the things, and again, for leadership, also very challenging, is like, even if you're identifying an opportunity with AI right now, one part is, okay, we know here we could use AI to make things more efficient, but then you take money, you invest into this, but how do you know whether in 6 months from now, even 3 months from now, this is still the best way of doing it? Or, you've already, your money evaporate because there's already a better way of doing it because AI is going so fast. So that just adds another layer of complexity, of course, for businesses to decide, what their approach is going to be.
And that's where governance comes in.
Absolutely.
Right. And so if you as a leader know enough about your actual true operations and you know how to measure it and it's well defined and you actually can follow, if it's a piece of paper, if it's a widget, and if you can actually say, I understand what the contents of it are, I know what happens to it, I know what the intended purpose is and what the output is, input, process, output, for every single little thing that moves through your organization at the most granular level. If you know as a leader enough about every single one of those things, hug AI, because it's well defined enough to be able for you to automate it. Until you get to that point, it may fail. Because if you don't know what data you're putting into it and what data you're using as part of that workflow, and what the desired process is, and what the purpose of that workflow is, why are you doing this? You won't even be able to automate anything like that. What this starts with before AI even comes into play is, if you have it defined to this level, you can now measure it. You can now figure out whether or not it fails if it doesn't work the right way. So getting down to that granular level and this is where processes come in. This is where policies come in, templates, standards, work instructions, whatever you want to call it. Yes, call it something, right? Document it, because it starts with that documentation. As you're doing the documentation, bring in that control. Comes from a regulation, great. Comes from a framework, great. Probably every single regulation in the framework tells you to do what? Change management. Every single regulation in the world, for every framework in the world tells you to do what? Incident management. Great. Your incident management process is satisfying a lot of regulatory and framework requirements. Do you have that process well defined, or is it using really ethereal words because some template that you downloaded from who knows where is saying use things like using words like periodically, occasionally, sometimes, frequently, right? These words are not measurable words. So if you ever want to get to AI the right way, you define your competency level, you've associated to those influences, those regulations and those frameworks, all of those controls that apply to you. And now, optimize, baby. Go wrap AI on it, right? Whatever is that process that you've actually well defined, do it. Absolutely. Take your people that are going wacko because they're doing swivel chair from too many tools and go assign them to a bigger, higher cause. Absolutely, right? Use the technology to your benefit, but that requires leadership to stop and say, everybody stop and let's define what we're really all doing here and how all of our functions and our groups are operating, and demand that transparency and demand that documentation. Because if you think you're going to flip a switch on and automatically AI is going to work, I paid a bunch of money for this tool, let's flip the switch, just have this thing work. Why isn't it working? None of it does, right? It just doesn't work that way. And you have to get to where you define it for your company operations specifically.
Yeah, that's a great point, Karina. And going back to what you said a couple questions ago about the communication, how different people have different personalities. You have the person sitting in the middle looking this way, then looking that way. Who do you listen to? So if you think about it, if you have leadership on this side who can make decisions and allocate money, and you have the other parties on this side, leadership's usually going to get their way unless someone over there is really convincing. So other than leadership saying, go use AI, what are some things that leadership can do to effectively play a role in ensuring successful AI usage at the company, other than just saying, go do it? Like, how should they stay on top of these things?
Force their departments to document what they do and actually think about figuring out how to measure the success or failure of their current operations.
I think perhaps to add to this, again, I think just with any strategy and direction you're going with the company, I think enablement and allowing employees to experiment with AI and implementing use cases. I think one of the challenges I'm seeing as well is there are a lot of concerns right now about shadow AI being used by employees without anyone knowing that this is happening for business purposes, and who knows what type of data is being shared. That is quite often, again, because there is the excitement about AI, but lack of clarity on how can we use that in our business environment. So rather than stalling, I think, businesses benefit from, even if you have a simple AI policy to begin with, it is definitely more than having nothing. And I think, leadership supporting that and being very proactive and vocal about that will give different business functions confidence and experimenting with AI and using it. I think leadership teams also benefit from having a two-way communication, especially if within the leadership team there's perhaps a lack of confidence in fully understanding how AI works, the different types of technologies. And so creating like a way where it's not just a top-down but also bottom-up can definitely create an environment where businesses more easily and readily can adopt AI quicker and with higher confidence.
Definitely agree with that. Going back to something you said earlier, Sabrina, I found really interesting. You said when an app suddenly pops up and says, "Surprise, we've got AI now," the users a lot of times are really happy, but people like Karina and me might be there like, "Uh-oh, like we better look at a few things here." So what can companies do to be better about giving that option? Because if we're a GRC team, an app within our purview suddenly has AI, and we want to control it rather than just saying, "Oh, I hope everyone does the right thing. I really hope so." What would you say to people developing software about including those sort of features?
Yeah, so I think, working in GRC and GRC folks are very close to my heart. You're usually the people in the room that people roll their eyes at and don't really enjoy having you in the room, but someone has to be that person, right? And I think with AI governance, interestingly, actually, people are actively looking for guidance because the risks are just different and we are not used to dealing with them, and people are looking for guidance on ways how to approach that and how to implement controls. And so I think there are different layers to this, and I think one of the things to consider is you have your control that says, okay, you need to monitor performance in your AI, right? And once it's out there, you need to do periodic reviews of the performance. You need to do fundamental rights assessments, possibly, and anti-discrimination assessments. You need to do extensive testing, making sure that it's not biased towards certain groups if bias is a concern. And I think here, turning the control into technical capabilities can be difficult, and meeting those requirements. So I think here definitely getting the tech team on board, and that is everyone from the ones who are building the system or saying, okay, third-party tool, to IT who know about cyber risks and security risks, and having that conversation, and then going out and assessing, okay, how do we deal with these risks technically? How do we get these insights, these metrics, so that we can mitigate the risk and also monitor and manage that control. And I think that's incredibly important. I think one of the things is, for sure, again, us being a technical solutions provider in that space, is that there is sort of like a wave behind the AI implementation wave, where these tools are being developed and are now rising in the market, being made available, but by all means, it's not a well-established market. And so there are more and more tools available, but it's yet again, of course, also another to do for then tech teams to figure out which tools make sense for their reality that they need to use to make sure that they are monitoring and implementing these controls.
No, great point. So you mentioned fundamental rights and discriminatory risk. Some people might think that kind of falls into privacy risk. Arguably, no. Maybe there's some overlap. So how would you balance the fundamental rights, discriminatory risk, privacy risk, and AI risk? What's the same? What's different? How do we handle that?
Great question. And I think, again, go back to what you already have probably implemented and what you already have in place, and then make sure you adapt it with some of the unique risks that come with AI. So you still have your cyber and security risks, right? And then for AI, similar to other risks, you have external and internal threats. And then in the case of AI, an external threat would be, for instance, deepfakes, right? And how do you deal with that? Are they actually deepfakes a concern for your business operations? Maybe they're not. Maybe there are other types of external threats. And then internal threats would be things such as an employee sharing source code with ChatGPT. And then here it's really good to have that internal use policy on AI systems in place. And so here, these are then the type of questions you want to ask yourself from a cybersecurity risk perspective. Okay, what is the new dimension? What are the new variables that you're looking at here with the use of AI? Your next category would be privacy risk, absolutely. And I think here it's the same regulations apply, the same concerns. I think specifically to AI, if you're developing your own ML-based systems, AI systems internally, you definitely need to ask the question, are we using data that contains personal data that we feed into the system and it learns about that data? And if yes, how do we do that? What are the privacy concerns? Can we do that? And then the other piece is, do we feed the system with personal data? So again, and then here, do you implement guardrails, right? So for instance, for generative AI, you can implement guardrails that if I were to share my social security number with a generative AI system, then that guardrail blocks that information is shared with the LLM, and it's either encrypted or the message is not being sent, the prompt is not being sent in the first place. And so these are sort of the considerations you want to make when it comes to privacy risks. Now, new to AI is certainly fundamental rights and anti-discrimination. And so I think this goes back to where perhaps, this is a new competency that you will need to have either in-house or outsourcing this. Because here you need to assess, okay, for the type of AI system we have, and again, doesn't apply to all AI, it's only for certain types of healthcare, high-risk industries, right, financial institutions. Does the AI possibly discriminate against certain groups? And we've all seen those news, we've all seen those scenarios, the cases with biometric identification where these systems are biased towards certain people. And so that is a new dimension you want to assess from a risk category perspective. And then last but not least, model risk. Model risk in some industries is nothing new. Again, regulated industries, they've been implementing highly sophisticated algorithms that make complex decisions for the last 15 years. But for some industries and some businesses, it's definitely something new. This is, for instance, the space that we are operating in with Palqee Prisma. And with model risk, really the question that you're assessing, or the risk, is, does the AI perform as intended in different contexts and scenarios? And so, Mike, when you were saying this, that's exactly what model risk does. Let's not just hope it does what it's supposed to. Let's actually make sure it does what it's supposed to, and we have the oversight and monitoring capabilities in place. So here you're assessing metrics such as accuracy, hallucination, context relevance, and these types of metrics.
But Sabrina, this is the type of thing we see in GRC. So the question, does it act as intended? What if it's intended to just be a free-for-all and just make the company money and be super engaging and super addicting, so people use that product rather than ChatGPT? How do you balance that?
Great question. And I think, yes, this is where it comes back to governance and also regulatory requirements and even existing regulations, right? So you, as you deploy this type of solutions and services, you will have a definition what as intended means. And I think why, especially in regulated industries, you can't afford to just say, well, it could mean anything and we just let it do whatever it wants to, is because you're potentially facing serious financial, legal, and reputational risks. Yeah. And you just cannot afford it with AI. It's going to backfire. Again, 80 to 95%, whichever stat sort of, you're looking at that as circulating at the moment, of AI projects never see the light of day because of that reason, because actually businesses do have the accountability and say, no, the risk is too high. Thank you, but no thanks, until we actually have more assurance and the governance and the structure in place. And just to give you a very specific example on how detailed and how specific that is, let's just say you would have a generative AI internal tool, right? That you ask, hey, where is Sabrina Palme from? And one time it answers, Sabrina is from Germany. And the other time an answer, Sabrina, is from Düsseldorf, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Now, which answer is correct? They're both correct, possibly, but depending on your AI use case and depending on what you want to achieve, loan approval system, let's just say, maybe the system would need to provide information that is city and country, and only then for your specific use case, it will be considered correct. So that is sort of the granularity that you're looking at specifically when it comes to generative AI and monitoring performance, and why you want to have these controls in place that allow you to say, this is what we define as the accuracy this is the accuracy level that we need for the system to be reliable, and for us to have the assurance that we can trust the results.
Yeah.
Data classification is, I'm going to chime in here. Data classification, data discovery. There's a lot of data sitting underneath Susie's desk on the server that you haven't updated in 5 years. Data classification, data discovery. Know where your data is. If you're going to build it in-house, know where that data is. Classify that data. The very, very most important, significant data, you don't have that much of it, just know where it is. Right. You do not need to encrypt publicly available data, despite what your cloud storage salesperson tells you. Think about that one. Okay. You do not have to data hoard forever. So make sure you've classified your data and really are hyper-focused on the most important stuff. Please log into HHS OCR, publicly available. There are over 320 million individuals who now in the US have an active investigation going on about their PHI and EPHI being breached. What does this mean? This is a listing. 320 million individuals in the US.
Yep.
The criteria here is there's an active investigation by the HHS of companies who have to abide by HIPAA, and these companies have lost more than 500 individuals' names. So this is not for the breach that happened 7 years ago. There was an investigation. The investigation was closed 5 years ago. This is current active investigations. That's over 90% of the US population now has an active investigation going on about their health information being violated, completely violated. We're storing too much data unnecessarily. We're not adhering to retention and destruction standards. Come back to data classification. Certain data types need to be purged in 2 weeks. You do not need to hold on to it forever, encrypt it forever, store it forever. Remember, the longer you hold data, your subservice organizations are going to continue to store it downstream. You have no idea where the hell it ends up, and it is out of your control. Your SOC 2s that you get do not include subservice organizations. When you use a vendor, that vendor sends you a SOC 2. That SOC 2 does not include their vendors. So when they take your data and they send it to their vendors, you have no visibility or legal liability to that downstream passing. Tighten your vendor data classification, tighten your vendor management controls, really tighten it. Really ask the questions. Move past checkbox compliance. Check I got that SOC 2, no longer works. Check I got that BAA, no longer works. I've read BAAs that say one statement at the top of the same document is contradictory to the bottom statement of the same document. Completely opposite statements. It needs to go away. Can I make a very quick plug for one more thing? Sabrina, thank you for joining us. I want to just say one more thing. Please do not put pictures or videos of your children online. Not on social media, nowhere. Please, geofencing, geolocation, social engineering, so incredibly easy to find out kids' identity, therefore your identities. We're using IoT. Our refrigerators talk to us. For some reason, I've got to push the phone on start the washing machine from here instead of 2 doors down on the actual washing machine. We do not know how to change default passwords on our appliances at home, on our cars, on all of these things. Please do not create a digital signature and footprint for your children that they have not opted in for or asked for. Let them do that when they grow up. Please, virgin social security numbers are a real thing. Lock your kids' social security numbers down. Some kids, by the time they hit college and go into student loans for their university, all of a sudden come to find out that they 10 years ago have incurred hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and now they're delinquent. So please make sure that they are born, they are issued that social security number, and that number is locked instantly. Lock your own social security numbers, but please protect our kids. Do not parade their identities online. There's just so much out there that's trying to create that identity and create create that image of who they are and algorithms, and just please don't do it. It doesn't matter that somebody likes the cake that they had. It doesn't matter. Like at the end of the day, it just doesn't matter. Just do not expose them to that, please. That is my closing thought for today, Sabrina. Thank you. Mike, I look forward to the next one, and I'll be quiet from now.
No, that message is especially important with AI now. Like we might think we trust the bigger companies like Google, Meta, OpenAI, but with other smaller companies getting involved, we have to be really cognizant of giving it access to our sensitive data and things like our children's photos, our sensitive photos, our important files. We definitely need to keep that to account for that sort of thing. There are a good amount of questions and comments. We are running out of time now, but we always make sure to go back and answer every single one of them. Sabrina, if you could jump in and answer the ones that you think are pertinent, that'd be awesome, but no pressure. We'll get to it if you don't. So Sabrina, thank you so much for joining us today. Do you have any final words for the audience? And if you could also let everyone know where they can find you.
No, of course. Just thank you so much for having me today. Very much enjoyed the discussion. And yes, if you have any questions, especially about deploying AI, model risk management, monitoring and performance, shoot me a message, connect with me. I think the best way to do that is through LinkedIn. So yeah, just get in touch through Sabrina Palme, and then more than happy to support.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you would like to connect with Karina, Sabrina, or me, you could just go to the post that's attached to this literal webinar and just click on our name and hit the connect button. Happy to connect with you. So our next webinar will be on August 20th. We'll be sharing details about that in the next week or so. We're really excited. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I know you have a lot going on midweek, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.